Welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name is, of course, Csaw or Chris, and today we're talking about Guild Wars 2 in 2023. Today we're talking about the newest Living World episode, or I guess it's not going to be Living World anymore. I don't know. The newest story content, What Lies Beneath, that was added to the game. This is the first piece of content that progresses the story past the End of Dragons expansion, and it's about a year from when the expansion came out, so quite a wait for it. To be clear, there was content released by Guild Wars 2 between End of Dragons and now, a lot of it to do with Season 1 content being reintroduced to the game, as well as a new strike mission and stuff like that. So there has been stuff, but you know, in terms of new content that goes past the expansion, this is the first taste of it. So we're going to talk about it, talk about my thoughts. There's a lot surrounding this in the community because it's kind of come out, like I say, a year after the launch of the expansion, as well as right after a blog that really dived into the future content cycle for Guild Wars 2 and talks about what players can expect. So there was a lot of expectations on this episode, and for some people it fell pretty flat. I will come out and say that's kind of the direction most people are taking on this, but we'll dive a bit deeper into what the actual episode looks like, what the gameplay was like, and what I think we should see in the future. Before that, though, I should mention I am a Guild Wars 2 or ArenaNet partner. Does that mean I won't say anything bad about Guild Wars 2? No, I'll say the good, the bad, and the medium. You'll see lots of that throughout this video. What it does mean, though, is that there are 2 sponsored links in the description below. They are referral links. If you use either of them, it does support the channel. One of them is for anyone who would like to try the game for free. You can make your account for free, and it helps the channel. And the other one is if you would like to purchase any of the expansions, and that also helps out the channel. That said, though, let's dive into the video. Alrighty, so let's talk about it. I've seen a lot of other popular Guild Wars 2 content creators already kind of give their thoughts on this chapter of the living story, or the whatever the story content's going to be called from now on. And I'll give my own thoughts too. I think my opinion is interesting because I am not a person who plays Guild Wars 2 as my main MMO. I play lots of different MMOs, and I return very casually to Guild Wars 2 whenever there is a new content update for the game. And I think in a lot of ways, ArenaNet designs their game to kind of satisfy those people because there is no sub fee. It's very easy for people to just join in for a couple of months whenever there's new content and then, you know, drift away for a little bit. Whereas if you are a MMO content creator for Guild Wars 2, you're likely playing Guild Wars 2 as your primary game, and you might have different expectations than someone who's very casual with it. So I'll kind of go in sharing my thoughts on this, coming in pretty casually. I, much like a lot of the community, sense that there hasn't been a ton of content, or at least new content to the game in a while. As I mentioned at the start of this video, they have introduced Living World Season 1 content back to the game. I actually played Guild Wars 2 back during Living World Season 1, and because of that, you know, it was fun to go and reminisce with that content, and there were a lot of different takes and like even a new strike mission, so there was stuff to do for sure over the year. But I'd say it was quite a while without a new update. Not quite like the content drought we experienced around, I think it was Heart of Thorns that had like the longest content drought. It was like 8 months or like something wild without anything. So it wasn't anything like that. And there was a lot of communication over this time too about what we could expect, which I do appreciate. They mapped out what they were going to do with like Season 1 right after the expansion, which was great. And they've once again given us some more direction now about where they're going to go in terms of Living World content after this, which is a great segue into why expectations were so high for this. So number one, it had been a while without any new pushing the story forward content. Number two, they released a blog post that really highlights the future of Living World content for Guild Wars 2. And in this post, they specifically talk about how they're going to kind of scale back the scope of expansions, but have them more frequent, which, if I'm to understand it, is kind of what Guild Wars 1 did in a lot of ways. And then they're also going to stop the branding of Living World content for the in-between expansion content, and have essentially quarterly patches that progress things between these expansions. The big benefit here being that you no longer have to play during the time that content's released to be able to get it for free. which is the good thing about the old Living World system. The bad thing is when someone would join the game afterwards, buy the expansion, and then for some reason not have those episodes of Living World content unlocked when they bought the expansion. So it kind of resolves that by, I think, having it more tied into the price of whatever expansion you're going for. But that's not what we're focusing in on here. The big thing is that they're moving a little bit away from what they used to do in terms of Living World to a quarterly content schedule. With all of that, there was some pretty high expectations in terms of what this content would provide. I mean, things were already pretty high because it is the first thing pushing the story. People were like, hey, we might get something really exciting since we've been waiting for so long. Other people, on the other hand, were like, oh, did they just start working on this like pretty recently if they've kind of now decided what they're going to do with content? I suspect this is something that they've been working on in the background for a while. And from what I sense from it, they might have even had my guess is that this is actually a much bigger patch that they've deliberately cut in half to kind of have two chunks of content. And we'll touch a little bit more about that at the very end of this video when we talk about how the episode ends. But it feels to me like they had a very full episode worth of content and they've cut it in half. So let's talk about the episode itself. Gameplay-wise, very similar to everything we've experienced in the past. Very story-driven. The instances in which the story is given it's done so well in Guild Wars 2. You start this in kind of like a party that falls flat where you're just like, you're talking to Rama, you're talking to Gorik. A lot of the characters that we came to love throughout End of Dragons get their stories told again, which makes a lot of sense because they were prime characters in End of Dragons, but it's a little bit weird now because we've gone so long since End of Dragons and actually gone back to a lot of these old season 1 characters. And now, like, it was kind of a twist to really adjust yourself to these characters that are more the present or the future characters of Guild Wars 2, which I found a bit jarring at first. But as soon as I remembered, oh yeah, like this is what they're about. The whole thing is about Gorik wanting to be a detective. And it's pretty well done and pretty funny. They do a really good job of the way dialogue's presented in Guild Wars 2. I'd say at this point, Guild Wars 2 has mastered the way to deliver story in MMOs in the least boring way. Because I think a lot of MMOs might have really good story, but if you're clicking through and having to read just text box after text box, it can be very unexciting, like just not engaging, and so it's really nice when it is so seamless. It's voice acted, it's happening over the gameplay, and it's beautiful. So in terms of the actual way the play of the game goes, it felt the same as a lot of other episodes. There wasn't a ton of gameplay side to the actual stories, I wouldn't say. Like the first scene, you're really just talking, and that's fine. The second scene, you're doing kind of a gather stuff. It's kind of like a detective quest, I guess, is probably why they did it. You're trying to get an item that each of these people in the map want so that you can get a piece of information. They do a really good thing where they have, more than the required amount of people that you can do stuff for. And then you have the option to continue doing it if it's an activity you like, or just do the easiest ones to finish it as quick as you can if you're someone who just wants to push forward with the story. So I think that they do a really good job of kind of playing to those two different styles of gameplay. And then the last one is the kind of the mission that actually has a lot of combat, and there's a boss you fight. There's some really interesting story threads regarding this creature or this boss, bringing back visions of past people who died, and really impacting the commander or the player character. So some really cool stuff there. And we also find, spoilers, we do find a ley line near Cantha. So that kind of resolves a lot of the big question at the end of Dragons is how Cantha is going to power itself now that all that happened in End of Dragons happened. There is a ley line, which once again kind of connects back to a lot of the stories we saw way back in, I guess, season 3 or 4 or whatever it was around Heart of Thorns, where ley line and unfiltered raw magic was such a big conversation. So some really cool story steps in terms of the actual direction of the story, because that's another big question a lot of people have right now is where is the story heading? We've kind of gotten through this dragon arc, and they had an expansion named End of Dragons. They've had like Decade of the Dragons or something as like an event. Like they've said, hey, this is the end of that chapter. And I think a lot of players are interested to see what is the next big arc. So that was kind of some of the weight of this episode 2. And it didn't answer that question directly. It's not like a new villain that's clearly the next big thing we're dealing with emerged or something like that. But there is, a lot of mystery, a pretty interesting like monster or demon of some sort that's feeding on this energy source. And I think that'll be more fully explored in the next part of this episode. So let's get to the big bad, because I think I've set things up pretty well, and I've talked a lot about the things I liked. The worst part of this for me was the ending of the episode. It essentially just ended very abruptly after your boss fight. And it makes sense to end after a boss fight, but it just seemed extremely sudden, to the point where I actually had to go onto Google and be like, how do I progress the story past this? And read through a bunch of forums and Reddit posts, and they're like, oh, this is actually the end. Like, if you look at the story journal, you'll see that the next part's labeled in the next story step. And I'm like, oh. So it did not feel very concluded. And to me, that's why I kind of think this episode might have actually been like, twice as long, but they decided to cut it in half. And maybe because of that, they'll be able to release things quicker. Because I think the concern a lot of people have here is that, is this part of like now the quarterly updates, and like this is what we get and we have to wait 3 months for the next part of the story? Because if that's the case, it feels a little bit lackluster. If, however, they've cut this in half and we get like, this piece of story, and then a month and a half later we get the next piece of story, and then we have a bit of a longer wait after that, that might feel a lot better. So it depends on how long they take. And I think the biggest thing here is it wasn't communicated very clearly. Like the last piece of story context, or like a mission on like the top right of your screen, says like, wait for your allies. And I was like, does that mean there's more to do? Like, do I have to do more events around here? Like, what does this mean? It just didn't feel very final. And because of that, it leaves a very bad like ending taste to the episode. And I think that's what people are struggling with, or at least that's what I'm struggling with. The things that are introduced outside of the story is a brand new map. Granted, it looks very similar to some of the other assets in Cantha. Like if you like Jade Green, you're gonna like the new map, because there's a lot of that, which is fair. As well as a bunch of new metas, and like it's very focused on the map and the metas, and I think that's something Guild Wars 2 has done really well. I talked about the instant story steps in the the start of this video. The other parts of the story have you engaging with the map. They have you pushing events throughout the map. They have you like exploring different areas of the map. There's a whole system where you kind of need to have like this special mask on so you don't get like contamination in your airway and stuff like that. Like there's a lot to do with the map, which I don't think I did very well at the start of this video. You might see me struggling with that. Eventually I caught on about how you protect yourself from that. But yeah, so the map, the meta event, like they feel pretty on par with other episodes. I think it's the story that felt just very jarring in terms of how it ended, and lackluster in terms of being the kind of start, the kickoff to whatever this new story arc is. It didn't feel like, wow, something big's happening. Like it didn't feel that exciting, despite the fact that I think it should feel very exciting. So that's kind of the issues I have with it. I'd say they just like, it was pretty good, but it didn't feel like they dug deep enough, right? Like that's kind of the big thing here, is that it didn't seem big enough for what it was. And that might have been a lack of communication in terms of what we should expect. It might have to do with like poor timing in terms of when they released that other blog post. For instance, the blog post that talks about how they're going to treat Living World, if they had launched this episode and then like that same day launched the blog that had like the first paragraph is like, hey, this episode ends at this point, you can expect the next episode at this date, and then it goes into this whole thing about how they're going to do quarterly updates and smaller, like that might have been a better way to do it in terms of like just having the information ready for people. There's also like a lot of like the trailer for this episode wasn't that great. It wasn't very exciting the whole way through, I think, and people the Guild Wars 2 community, including more casual players like myself, I think we're sitting there ready to be super excited about any kind of new push to the story. So it was a pretty, like, it was kind of a thing of high anticipation, but you could definitely win if you had the goods to deliver on it, and they didn't really have the goods to deliver on it. Overall, though, it is a good, like, it's a solid piece of content. I think it gets the job done. It does give a breath of new life into the game for people who are playing it as their absolute main everyday game. And hopefully it's long enough to get to whatever the next story step is. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the episode. I know these videos always get super rambly, but I wanted to get in there, try it out pretty soon, and like kind of get my own thoughts down in a video before I watch too many other people's takes on it or something like that. Generally, I'd say that the takes on the internet, like most like general public, seem to not super love it. They seem uninspired by it. Guild Wars 2 content creators definitely are straddling that line of it was decent content, but you know, one of the less good entries into the living world. Like if you were to have like a tier list of all the episodes, it's probably lower end. It seems to be what I've seen other people say about it. So, you know, I think my sentiments are around there too. Just interesting to see it as a casual player who isn't, you know, I'm not going to be doing this meta event for the rest of my, you know, every day until the next episode. So for me, the story instances have a lot more weight to them. Either way, though, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on the episode. If you did give it a try, let me know what you thought of it. If you're someone who doesn't play Guild Wars 2 and you're kind of just getting a glimpse of it through me, I'd like to hear your thoughts too as well. So, but hopefully you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.